Hello and welcome everybody. I realize I'm live now. I hope you can hear me. I'm just going to check the setup because I still don't trust it properly. Just give me one moment.
Welcome everybody.
Okay,
I realize
that sounds
I'm live
good.
now.
Now okay, it looks like people managed to pick it up. So I'm just going to go online off the cuff. I'm sorry about I have to check if you can see this. I think if you look carefully, there seem to be waves traveling through the camera continually. Now this could be because the camera has been sabotaged, or it could be because you're watching the live dew attacks, but I rather suspect it's the camera, but it has never done this before as far as I noticed. This is particularly bad because the background is white, so you can see these waves traveling through, there's these shades. I'm very, very sorry about that. Now the other thing, let me just check if the video quality is high enough, because I'm currently in a hotel. Okay, I think it's okay. I hope you can hear me. So I'll just do the best I can. Right now, my entire life and everything I'm trying to do is a bit, up and in total chaos. And that's because leading up to the court hearing, I actually traveled to the United States. I want to report about that. I've come back, and since I came back, and also in the US, I was attacked continually in the hotel rooms. Now, when I came back and traveled back to my home, actually at home in Switzerland, I was gunned to bits. So I took my stuff and I went into hotels, and I've been just hotel hopping, which is actually a lot better than at home, unfortunately, because I really want to be at home and prepare this court bundle. But the problem is that after about half an hour, the weapons lock onto me again. So in every single hotel I've been to, after about half an hour, I hear them shoot the walls systematically around me. You could think, oh, maybe they are trying to hone in on me, but it's so, pitch perfect, and it's so well targeted. I think they honed in on me a long time ago, and it's more psychological terrorism. So they systematically shoot every single one of the four walls around me before starting to gun me again inside the room. But nevertheless, it is still a million times better than being at home, where the weapons are already perfectly tuned in on my bed area, my work area, and I'm just machine gunned to bits with pulsed energy projectiles. So I really need your donations right now, because I'm, against my will, I'm forced to waste a lot of money on hotels. And I'm trying to be, go for the cheapest ones going, but, still it's, oh God, it's really painful. I want to set it on the tab in court next week, because this is ridiculous. What I really want to do is be at home and just bunker down and get the work done for this court case, but they're doing everything to disrupt me. So there's this machine gunning with pulsed energy projectiles. There's turning on the dozens of chip implants I have under my scalp. And what they do is kind of threefold. So number one, it is pain torture. So they are sending artificial pain signals. And there seems to be only that much charge in every single one chip. So, when they want to, pain torture me with a particular chip or particular set of chips, that kind of lasts for a few hours, but then they have to switch to another one. If they want to use the same chip to pain torture me on exactly the same point on my scalp for an entire day, they seem to be having to pulse the chip, or pulse a nearby chip somehow. There's this weird charging up using pulsed energy projectiles that I've noticed. And then what they do is, when one chip is kind of exhausted, they switch to another. And I noticed that after about, half a day or a day of torture, I have sores where the chips cook the tissue, the tissue starts inflaming. So that's one thing that they are doing, but it's agonizingly painful. And because it's synthetic pain signals, it's much stronger than what the nervous system would generate. So it feels like you have, nails, hammered into your head, or a drill going through your skull. And under these conditions, it's almost impossible to work. So what I had to do already today, for example, is flee this hotel and just go for a walk, and somehow being outside and moving around kind of stopped the pain. So then I just spent a couple of hours just recovering. I mean, there's always a physiological dead time when I'm just absolutely incapable of doing anything because of this pain torture that I just suffered. So even when the pain stops, there's still inflammation, there's still feeling sick. And it's basically what they're trying to do is waste my day so that I can't get much done. And there are phases where I have difficulties speaking, I've got difficulties walking around, just because of the physiological damage and the brain damage that they cause with this. So I'm struggling, you know, I've got the pain torture, I've got the pulsed energy projectiles. Oh yes, and I wanted to tell you about, you know, another mode, which is the burning mode. So they've got a way to burn my scalp and then literally systematically burn off my hair. That's what they do. And that's also painful. And another way, it's the pain torture. And then there's the mode where they heat up my entire head and they are cooking my brain. You know, so there are all these things, and they make you feel physically sick in different sort of ways. So they can pain torture me to the point that I'm throwing up, and they've done that. They kind of did this brain calibration, and I reported about that by making me throw up 4 times in a row, and always dialing up the pain torture, synthetic pain torture without heat. And then I throw up and they switch it off, and it's almost like a switch has been flicked and I feel fine again. And then they did it again. So by doing that, what you're doing is you are calibrating the chip signals to the human pain threshold. Okay, so they've done that. So what they do these days is they keep me just below the point of throwing up, which means you're not throwing up, but you feel like you're about to. And again, you can't really work in this sort of condition. So that's the sort of torture I'm, you know, suffering right now. And it is absolutely debilitating, I have to say. So that's what's going on. But anyway, I'm saying that so that you understand why I'm not coming online, or why I look totally wasted when I come online. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not a drug, you know, person. I don't take drugs, but I'm being tortured, which effectively has the same, you know, long-term effects and short-term effects of just being out of it. Nevertheless, I've got good news to report. And, you know, one of the things that I kind of learned throughout all this torture is that the game, I mean, first of all, the game is brain damage and long-term debilitation, of course, but most of all, you know, it is short-term kind of inducing a dead time and hindering you from, you know, not just me, but all the other victims as well, you know, keep those in mind. It's hindering us from doing what we really want to do. It is wasting our time and wasting our life. Now, you can fight that by trying to reduce the dead time, you know. With physical torture, it's extremely hard because it's a physiological process. The brain just needs that long to repair. There's not much you can do. And I kind of advise against forcing yourself too much, because I learned that you exhaust yourself insanely. You know, actually long term, it will just lead to a physical kind of crash, you know. So I actually advise doing the complete opposite, okay, which also has long-term effects, but it helps a lot. Now, one of the things I found which works amazingly, and this is a trick I would like to pass on to you, it's like the exact opposite of what your parents would have done with you if you are, you know, really unruly. So if you have a small child and it's totally misbehaving, you know, typically you don't reward that behavior. Okay, so you don't give it a little present. Sometimes it actually works wonders if you surprise a child and you don't tell it off for being a real little shit. You actually give it an ice cream, right? But if you do it long term, the kid will just become a little asshole. Now, when you're being tortured, okay, it's kind of the same reward system, but for the perpetrators. So they torture you, they want you to feel down, they want, you know, to maim you so that you look uglier or less pretty and so on. But most of all, they want to see you suffer. Now, you know, and also they want you to not do what you're doing. It's kind of aversive conditioning. Now, one of the things that I found that really pisses them off and actually makes me feel great is that during the torture session or after, I just reward myself with something, you know, and it's amazing that what a fantastic effect that can have, you know. You just do something that you wouldn't do normally. You either eat an ice cream, even though you're feeling sick, or you're having a cup of tea, or you go for a nice walk, or I don't know, you just go, you know, and you buy yourself something small, cheap, and frivolous that just makes you happy, whatever that is, you know, a new notebook, or I don't know what, you know, something, you know, maybe some frivolous, fashionable jewelry for $3, whatever it is, right? But actually, the psychological effect of rewarding yourself with small stuff frequently is amazing, because then you're through the torture session and okay, it was shit, but you will forget about it. But then you're stuck with whatever, makes you happy. Maybe you're still licking that ice cream. Maybe you had a glass of wine and you feel like, woo, who gives a shit? Or you still have that, little notebook or jewelry that makes you happy. So, this is one thing that I learned, and I kind of turned this into a routine, and it's amazing, because what happens is that I just rewarded myself. I feel really happy. I feel really naughty for having, eaten that ice cream, or, I had that glass of wine, but you just feel exhilarated. And bit by bit, the effect of the tortures, either you just have cooler jewelry, or you're just happier. I mean, be careful not to turn into an alcoholic, because that also is a programming, and it's also programming to make you put on weight. But the point is, I put on weight through targeting anyway, so a bit of ice cream is not going to help, not going to make it worse. So who gives a fuck, right? So, but through that, I somehow managed to condition myself to become extremely happy. So usually I am the happiest after a torture session, which is a real bummer for these people, right? Because I just went for a walk, I had ice cream, sometimes I have a glass of wine, and, I don't know what, maybe I bought myself a nice necklace, hey. So I'm saying this so that you can emulate it. And also, if you're not a torture victim, you can transpose it into your normal life as well. So I really recommend this as kind of canceling negative aversive conditioning with positive conditioning. And if you get yourself something that has a lasting effect that's longer than the torture session that you put through, or the shit you have to put up with in your normal life, honestly, you will just become happier with time. You really will. And if nothing else, you will teach yourself how to make yourself happy. Okay. And you can call on that whenever. So I actually thought that was a cool thing to come out of this. Okay, I put on weight, okay, on top of what I put on through targeting, right? So you can see my cheeks get, I've got hamster cheeks now, and I'm a bit round and I don't fit into my dresses, but who gives a fuck? Because I'm just in the process of taking down MI6, right? So a few more kilograms here and there really don't make that big a difference. Now, the reason why I'm making this point is because I know that there are thousands and thousands of torture victims, okay? And coping with torture is the hardest thing to do. I mean, it's what we have right now is not even Auschwitz, because Auschwitz kind of lasted for a few years and then they killed you, right? What you have now is Auschwitz for decades for some people, okay? Some people have been tortured and have survived decades of this shit, okay? And that is just superhuman. Right now we have this, but also, I mean, Auschwitz also, it was very cold and you were starved and you were, kind of in the process of dying, right? That was very extreme. But we have now a new form of extreme torture, which is extreme pain torture, 24/7, that doesn't kill you, right? So this is why a lot of these, agents who are talking to their victims through V2K, they make a lot of references to Joseph Mengele, and they compare themselves and they say things like, oh yeah, we are Dr. Mengele and shit like that. I keep hearing that from victims, who have V2K. And the reason why these people think that of themselves, the criminals, is because they are running Joseph Mengele sort of experiments, okay? But the torture that the victims suffer are just like what people suffered in the concentration camps, all right? And it is all this really freakish stuff of taking over your brain and controlling your limbs, and then pain torturing you and making you throw up, and then having you in agonizing cramps again. And it's this non-stop cycle, right? And I mean, it's absolutely horrific. It is really horrific. And there are thousands of people in our communities who are living in a concentration camp with their personal, Dr. Mengele, and they still have to hold down a job. They still have to pretend like everything is fine because their loved ones don't get it, or we'll put them into psychiatry, which is actually a modern concentration camp where they really would be tortured and most likely killed and so on, So in all this shit that we're going through, right, I'm trying to clutch at straws, and I'm trying to teach you everything that really worked for me, okay? And I really understand what you're going through. I have been burned. I'm being raped daily. I'm being put through pain torture such that I mostly am functional just for a few hours per day, you know, maybe 1 or 2 days per week, really. And it is absolutely awful, and nobody understands what we're going through. But what I'm saying is that whatever shit you're being put through, there are still ways where you can get one over these motherfuckers, okay? And rewarding yourself with whatever small thing that you can find is really it. And I can tell you that you can trick the human brain 1,000,000 times into being happy, whatever shit you're going through. Really, I mean, people who have natural chronic pain, by the way, open brackets, I have this quiet suspicion that a lot of chronic pain patients actually are implanted with body chips, okay? Keep that in mind. You know, you might want to get yourself a bug detector if you have chronic pain somewhere in your body. If it's somewhere deep down in an organ or in your digestive system, right? It could still be chips, but it could be hard to measure. However, if you have joint pain, like hip pain, knee pain, ankles, or hands, please get yourself a bug detector and check if you're not implanted, because you might be actually a victim of human experimentation and the torture victim. Okay, and I say that because the human body has a natural tendency to mask pain with time. If it doesn't mask pain, if you have intense pain all the time over years, it implies to me that the pain might be synthetic. Okay, so if your doctors have tried everything and nothing helps, especially if pain medication doesn't help, it might be chips. Okay, keep that in mind. But this just as a footnote. What I'm trying to say is that chronic pain patients also find ways, you know, to have a happy life, even though they actually suffer the equivalent of nonstop torture, you know. So what I'm trying to say is right now, while we're fighting these, you know, against these motherfuckers, the torture is going to increase. So whatever we can find to live, you know, happily and maybe live even happier than we lived before is going to piss off these motherfuckers and will make us win this battle. Okay, that's why I'm saying it. I'm not belittling pain. Heck, I have been through shit today alone, right? But I really understand what you're going through. But keep in mind, reward yourself. Sweets are great. Alcohol is actually great as long as you only do it occasionally. Like 1 glass per week, that's okay. If you get into 1 glass per day, you are into neurotech, alcoholism, brain conditioning. They want you to turn into an alcoholic. Do not do that. However, if you're just drinking a glass of wine per week, that's totally fine. And I tell you, it will actually help you to switch off, you know, so that's great. And actually the French do it every day. They have wine with lunch every day, believe it or not, right? I was amazed when I lived in France, but don't do it because that is too much. That is daily, it's too close to conditioning. But occasionally, if you just drink alcohol, that's totally fine. And actually it might be beneficial to unhook you from neurotech. That's what I found. You know, maybe they still neurotech me, but I still don't give a shit after a glass of wine. So anyway, this is very important to know. Now, the other thing I wanted to say now that I'm talking about how to survive this shit is the following. One of the biggest problems with pain torture, and this will be relevant as we're moving to court cases, right? It will become ever more relevant. It is suicide programming, okay? Suicide programming. Now, a lot of veterans are put through synthetic telepathy suicide programming because, especially the US government, I think wants to kill a lot of people who know how to use guns, okay? So they want to get rid of guns full stop, right, in the population, but they also want to get rid of people who know how to use them. And veterans, veteran soldiers are, you know, target number 1. So I think the entire high rate of suicide among veterans falls into that, right? I also think that PTSD is completely artificial and synthetic to some extent, at least. It can be amplified with synthetic telepathy. So my advice to all the soldiers, if you're suffering any sort of shit, or even if you don't suffering any sort of shit like chronic pain or, you know, psychological problems and stress and PTSD, if you're a soldier, you have to find your implants, okay? I'm telling you, you will be implanted head to toe, just like me, okay? But this means that you will also most likely be pain tortured at some point in your life, just like me, because there's so much money to be made of you. And eventually, most likely, they would want to kill you because you know how to use a gun, okay? So if you have pain, look for chips. If you have sudden bouts of anger, okay, there's a lot of therapies you can do, which have mixed levels of success. But most importantly, look for chip implants under your scalp with a bug detector, because those chips can be used to amplify natural, healthy anger into uncontrollable rage, okay? And the rage will have nothing to do with you or your relationship or you having a shit day. It will be purely remote neural monitoring and remote control of your brain. Okay, and once you know that, there are ways where you can cotton on to the sensation of the influence coming externally. Now, one guy who was jailed for attacking somebody with a knife and harming somebody told me that in jail his symptoms increased, and I said, "Ooh, that sounds like you were experimented on in this Swiss jail." And he said, yes, that was also his impression, because the TV, he actually noticed that the TV was flashing subliminal images, and he caught one. He actually saw them flashing these images. I was like, yeah, sounds like the Swiss jails, all right. And then I said, well, what do you do to cope with this? Because he was just the meekest and quietest and, you know, most polite, loving person I met. And he said, well, I figured out that the sensation of the synthetic telepathy was like it's on the periphery of my brain. It's coming from outside in. And when I want to hear what I really feel and think, I kind of have to go deep inside me. It's kind of like you go deeply into your brain, and it's hard to describe what that feels like, but that's the best way he could put it to me. Right now, those are his words. That's, you know, he had to translate a feeling, you know, into words, and then they went through my ear canal, and this is how I remember what he said, and now I'm translating it back into words to you. So this is the best way I can put it. The answer lies somewhere in that direction, and it kind of makes sense, because the chip implants, okay, there are implants you can put into the brain, but the vast majority of this really big clunking old tech is actually on your skull. So the electromagnetic fields would be starting on the outside, having an influence inward. So if you can kind of block the sensation from that and concentrate on whatever, you know, goes somehow deeper into your brain core, right, that will be closer to the real you. Okay, right. This is as far as we got so far, you know, but there are other ways. People told me of using a martial arts technique of being of no mind, right? That's a martial arts technique where you kind of like block everything and you just go back into your original state of breathing, you know, eating and sleeping. That's your core functions, right? Like a little bacteria. And all the higher processes you block out just to get some peace and relief from the non-stop manipulation of neurotech. So that's another method. Now, what I wanted to say about suicide programming, though, is you have to, first of all, as soon as you're suicidal, you have to assume, no, it's actually not me, it is external influence. But nevertheless, it can be overpowering, because that's the whole point of controlling your brain. The brain can't fight back because it can't generate signals as strong as the chip signals that are, you know, external and synthetic. So the brain can be overridden. And especially with suicide programming, extreme suicide programming, you need to find a physiological kind of block against that. Okay. Now, I really don't advocate any psychopharmaca, because you don't know what nanotech and shit they put into it. And most of it hasn't been tested on humans. It's being tested on you when you're taking it, right? So do not take that shit. However, there's a natural way you can put in a hardware block against suicide programming, it is fairly safe unless you're, severely diabetic. It is fairly safe because the human body has evolved to kind of, do this and survive this sort of thing. But one way that you can block suicide programming, and I know because I've done it several times, they really try to kill me by getting me, emotionally horrifically upset for no freaking reason, okay, to the point of me wanting to kill myself, even though I'm actually not suicidal. So I love myself too much, right? I love kicking, MI6's ass far too much to ever want to kill myself. So that's not going to happen. But because it's brain control, it can be an override. It's overpowering. So when I noticed that they were doing it, what I found made a huge difference and made suicide impossible. Okay, now wait for this, and please, this is not medical advice, this is survival advice, so take it like that, okay? And don't take it if you're diabetic or have other, severe problems like that. But what really helps against suicide programming is binge eating sugar. No, really, it fucking helps. And there's an evolutionary reason for that, and this is, if you binge eat sugar, it signals to your brain survival is guaranteed, everything is a-okay, okay? And this switches off suicide programming. It is physically impossible to kill yourself, in my experience, when you have just binged on ice cream or chocolate or high sugary stuff. It is physically impossible to feel that sad, to want to kill yourself. Okay, and there is a very good evolutionary reason for that, because if there's that much sugar that you can eat, it means that you are, in an environment of plenty. So, the next thing in the evolutionary, program that should kick in is, okay, everything is fine. Well, let's continue existing. Let's reproduce. Let's just survive. Let's, restart, and everything is fine. And this is actually an evolutionary hardware switch. And because it's hardware, nothing in terms of software can ever override that. And it is that simple. So I actually realized that, what happens when you're really hungry and you're suddenly eating something, right? Typically you go from grumpy like fuck to kind of amused, and you suddenly start chuckling over stuff and giggling over jokes, or just giggling for no reason because you suddenly have a sugar high. Now, exactly the same hardware process will happen when you're suicidal and you suddenly start binging on chocolate. After about 5, maximum 20 minutes, you kind of feel like, okay, maybe I want to kill myself, but not really right now. What the fuck? I can't be bothered, right? And eventually your mood improves. And I found and this is why I put on weight, okay? Because they did try to kill me. And I was like, fuck you, I'm just gonna binge on ice cream, and I'm gonna continue binging on ice cream until I feel better. I'm gonna, be a bit big, but I will not kill myself, and I'll sue these motherfuckers in court, right? So I really recommend that. And, this is, as I said, don't be stupid, okay? Don't do this shit if you are, severely diabetic or have other sort of adverse reactions to sugar. But also know that the human body evolved to be able to take a lot of sugar, and then it just converts it into body fat when it's too much sugar. Okay, so as long as you do it for survival purposes, it's fine, and it actually will be good for you. And after a suicide torture session, you'll come out thinking like, yay, I've got so much energy, I could rip out trees with my bare hands, So that's what you have to know. And I say that because people tend to go for alcohol when they get depressed and suicidal, but do not do that. Alcohol, yes, it is an anesthetic, and short term it can have an effect. But the problem is, if you binge on alcohol, you will make your body feel worse. Next morning, you will feel like shit and you will be even more depressed. However, if you binge on sugar and then you go to bed, your body's not going to burn it off. It will spend all its time trying to convert it into fat, but there will be so much blood sugar left the next morning. So when you wake up the next morning, you will feel like, fuck, I want to go and run a marathon, and that's the difference. So binge on sugar, never ever binge on alcohol with suicide programming. However, if you just had a hard week of neurotech and torture, and it's the weekend and you really want to have a break, and you're very sensible and controlled about it, then you can go for alcohol, because one glass of wine will really give you relief. It will kind of detach you from all this. Remote neural monitoring doesn't work that well, in my experience. When you are kind of, inebriated, you'll feel great. And if it's not too much alcohol, that's actually less calories than binging on a block of chocolate. Okay, so you have to know how to use these tricks. So once per week, I would say just have some rest with a bit of, a glass of wine. If you're in the habit of, drinking occasionally on social events, that's fine, but don't overdo it. But with suicide programming, never ever go for alcohol. Never. Go for chocolate, ice cream. Peanut butter is mostly fat, so it won't have the same effect. It will probably just make you sick. So go for high sugar stuff to really ramp up, your blood sugar level and get that high, because that will make suicide impossible. So remember, I'm a doctor, but of particle physics. I'm not a medical doctor, so do not take this as medical advice. However, if you want survival advice that nobody else can give you, well, this is it. Okay, so this is super important. Now, the reason why you should listen to this, even if you're not a target, okay, is because you most likely have other shit in your life. Okay, now, if you have just a cranky boss, or, young children who are about to, kill you, or you have problems with your partner or anywhere else in your life, these tricks still work. Okay, these tricks will work just the same. So, you can start doing the complete opposite of what you used to do. Instead of just roughing it through a phase where you feel really shit, you can just start rewarding yourself with little things every time you feel shit. And you will see that after a while, this positive reinforcement will really pick you up. And yes, you can eat, chocolate and sugar. And whoever says that chocolate doesn't help really doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about, so this is great. But my point is, all of this we need to do because we want to achieve a great goal. Okay, and the great goal, I think people forget how great that goal actually is. We want to shut down the biggest, the oldest global organized crime cartel that has plagued this planet for thousands of years, right? We are shutting down the entire intelligence network, the Jesuits, the Masons, the Satanists, the pedophiles, and all this in one go. Now, of course it's hard. Of course these people will fight back. Of course they want to kill us. Of course they're going to torture us. But that's not going to stop us, right? Because this is pretty much the Jesus project, okay? So Jesus was also, turning over the table of the money changers, if you remember, and he was going on about how there's this big evil empire and how really, people should love each other and help each other and all this sort of stuff. Now, that was the core of his message, which is universal. The Jesus project kind of back then went a bit, bottom up. He ended up being crucified, right? Well, I think the problem was that, he, being a he thought he's the son of God and he can do it alone or with just a gang of friends. Well, unfortunately, the Crown Corporation and the Vatican was much bigger than that, and they crucified the guy. So as far as project management goes, that was a bit of a bummer. Now, this time round, we're tackling the Jesus project, all of us together, right? Nobody claims to be the son of God, right? And be able to do it all by himself or with just a small group of friends. I'm telling you, not being the son nor the daughter of God, right? I'm an atheist. I'm telling you that systems analysis tells us that we can get this job done as long as we are all doing it together at the same time, right? And with all, I mean, not just all the people who are listening right now or all the people in the English-speaking world. I mean, all the people around the world, okay? So we are now tackling a project where we are shutting down an organized crime cartel simultaneously in the US, in the UK, in Germany, Switzerland, but also simultaneously in China, in Russia, India, and Africa, and Australia, and Latin America, right? Did I leave anybody out? You know, okay, Antarctica, heck, the cartel is down there too, but you know, there we will tidy up, you know, later. The most important part is these continents. Now, the reason why I say that is because there's still so much talk about, oh, the Russians did it, or the Chinese. It's like, no, guys, it's not the Russians and it's not the Chinese. It's this very same organized crime cartel. And in most cases, our very own, you know, Anglo-Saxon and Swiss people at the helm of this, right? So if you look, for example, at the communist mass murder in China and in Russia, if you dig down, I think you'll find that it was financed by exactly the same banks headquartered in Switzerland that financed Hitler. Okay, remember that Lenin was in Zurich, right? Being trained, groomed, and getting instructions before wandering off and, you know, doing the Russian Revolution. So there's always this connection. So remember, systems analysis tells us organized crime is not regulated, and any sort of regulated business always ends up with a mega monopoly. That is a law of system physics. Now, what that means is that organized crime had a monopoly with one dominant player already thousands of years ago. Nothing changed, okay? Nothing changed. It expanded a bit, and then it took over Russia, and it took over China, but now it's global organized crime. And there's only one syndicate. There aren't three, there's only one, because it's a monopoly player. It has global monopoly. So when you are talking about, oh, the Russians did it, or this and that, remember, in Russia, Russia is run by the Knights of Malta, controlled by the Vatican. I told you, I showed you in another broadcast how, you know, the Russian, the presidential flag has the Knights of Malta flag right there in front of your eyes, right? It has the Vatican 3 crowns, you know, standing for the 3 papal bulls, saying that they own all the land on this planet and us and our souls now and in the Netherlands or Netherworld, you know, whatever that might be. So it's all the same players. So please, guys, stop talking about, oh, the Chinese and the Russians, because it makes me want to scream. If you still talk about the Chinese, you haven't understood anything. Start talking about the criminals, the organized crime cartel, the Knights of Malta, the Committee of 300, and all the different incarnations of the one and only organized crime cartel, please. Okay? So we will do it all together, which means that there will be criminal investigations in Russia and China simultaneously with the US and Europe and Africa and Latin America. This is the goal, and this is the only way we can get this done, okay? So keep that in mind. There is no America first in this. There's only all of us together at the same time, or we are all fucked. Okay, and the reason why this is the case is because, remember, this is global organized crime. So the population that can be human trafficked in Europe is roughly the same as the human population in America, which is put together still tiny compared to Asia, right? And then there's Africa and Latin America. So if it's America first, fuck all's gonna happen. Do you understand? So it has to be America maybe being the trigger, but unless Europe and Russia and China follow suit, right, and all the other countries, India, Africa, you know, Latin America, unless we all start doing this, the only thing that will happen is that the criminals might kind of withdraw from the US and then really fuck the US from outside. How can this be done? Easy, by just simply dumping the petrodollar, right, which has been smeared around the world. As soon as that's done, America's fucked. Now, what if America issues its own currency? Let's say they do the, you know, wonderful thing of America going first and issuing either gold-backed currency or a gold-containing currency, like what's, you know, the plans that Karen Hudis, former general counsel of the World Bank, talked about. What if the US issued Aurum, which is, I think, what it's called? What would happen? Well, what would happen is that that would be the only actually valuable currency in the entire world, and every single bit of aurum ever minted in America would be sucked out of the country by midday because everybody would want to hold aurum. Do you understand? And there's actually a law in finance that says that when people have currency or different versions of currency, right, or maybe, you know, different quality of currency, the good quality of currency will always be sucked out of the market economy because everybody starts hoarding the good stuff and wants to do trade with the shittest version. So for example, when you just have coins, sometimes people keep the shiniest coins, right? And then they use the crappy ones for the vending machine. Now that's kind of like, okay, but they're all worth the same, namely nothing these days. But when you have actually differences in real value, people hoard the valuable stuff and try to pass off, you know, and settle trades with the shitty stuff. Okay, so when everybody else has paper currency and only the US would issue aurum, the aurum would be gone like bang. Okay, people would, you know, suck it out of the US and hoard it in Canada and Mexico and Europe and everywhere around the world. I can promise you that. That's again a law of system physics. They would be hoarding it in their basements or their attics or their, you know, I don't know what, their sugar or their cookie boxes at home. Nobody would be doing trades because it would be the most valuable thing for the first time ever issued on planet Earth, right, since they all got rid of gold. So there is no America first. There's only us as humanity all together at the same time. But this is a lot of work, okay? And it also implies that we all have to watch each other. So we have to, the Americans have to watch European news. I need to get in touch with Russian news, and somebody needs to translate Chinese news, because we all have to do this together. And if the Chinese and Russian people have problems getting rid of their organized criminals, then we in Europe and in the US will need to act as well, and vice versa. Okay, because otherwise people for whom we issue an arrest warrant in Europe and the US will just scurry off to Africa or Russia or China, right? And will take their wealth with them. So that's what we're dealing with. Now, I had to talk about all this because I want to get on to the next thing that I want to present, right? So hang on, let me just, let me switch now to world news, and I'm sorry that I had to bang on about suicide programming for so long, but it's actually one of the biggest problems we have. Really valuable people, precious people are being killed off, and neurotech is one of them. So now let me change to news. Okay, how do I share my screen? So in news, and I will talk about my court case too, but you know, as you know, it's on the 12th. But let's start with this one here. Okay, so let's start with the news. Now, first of all, I told you, I will get back to Russia and China in a moment, but this is the first tab that's open, so I might as well start with this. Now, what happened is that I came back from the US on the 26th, and exactly on the 26th, I got a strike by YouTube on one of my German videos. The German video that got a strike was the one called Internationale Staatskriminalität, translating to International State Criminality. And you can see that the strike was received on November 26th, the very day I flew back from the US to Europe. So it was a welcome present, you know, welcome present by MI6 or the CIA saying, you know, you had such a productive time, we need to fuck you somehow. So here it is. Now, this strike meant that I couldn't post any YouTube videos for a week, or so they said, right? So this is why I'm only posting now. I actually wanted to report about the US trip earlier, but now look carefully about the reason. What policy did I violate? I violated the nudity and sexual content policy. Like fucking what? I'm talking about international state criminality, and apparently I violated the nudity and sexual content, you know, policy. I mean, really? What sort of nudity? And then I realized, oh, I understand. I basically laid the CIA and MI6 bare and the BND. So they're all naked. They feel so naked after this video. That's why there was so much nudity. They felt all embarrassed. I'm so very sorry, you know. So anyway, so this is the video that got a strike, but you can also see that there's a second video that got a strike. Actually, it was a warning, and this video was taken completely off YouTube. And that is the interview with Professor Fetzer on the El Paso and the Dayton false flags. And as you can see, that got a strike for hate speech. And you can see that my appeal was rejected on 19 September 2019 here. And this was the first warning I received on August 16th. Now, the reason for this is that actually, if we can open this, let me show you the hate speech policy by YouTube. Okay, here's the hate speech policy. But if you look at this, the hate speech policy not allowed on YouTube, right, is the following. We remove content promoting violence or hatred against individuals or groups based on any of the following attributes. Now, Professor Fetzer wasn't appealing for violence or hatred, but when you go through, okay, so hatred against any individuals with any of the following attributes: age doesn't apply, caste doesn't apply, disability, ethnicity, gender identity and expression doesn't apply, nationality, race, immigration status, religion, sex or gender, sexual orientation, veteran status doesn't apply. The one thing that applies is supposed victims of a major violent event and their kin. And Professor Fetzer was talking about the fact that these violent events never took place, right? Now, if you go to examples, more examples, you have to expand this, right? There's one example that actually applies, and you will see what sort of fraud YouTube is pulling here. Now, so the things that you're not allowed to say, so here are the examples of hate speech not allowed on YouTube. Okay, so the first two, if you just open this page without expanding this, you will just see things like, I'm glad this violent event happened. They got what they deserved, referring to persons with the attributes above. So for example, if you ever said, I'm so glad that, I don't know what, the austerity measures of the UK government happened because they, disabled people, got what they deserved, they were all starved to death, that would be forbidden by YouTube, even though it's a fact, right? By the way, the UK government implemented austerity, which is known to be a financial scam, because the money that the government supposedly borrowed was never borrowed from anybody. It was just digitally created in a computer. So what it actually was, it was the genocide of the disabled people. Okay, that aside. But if you ever said, I'm so glad austerity happened, you know, they got what they deserved, you know, the disabled people, that would be hate speech. Of course it would be, right? That makes sense. I don't have any problem with that. I have a problem with austerity and killing disabled people. But now, when you look at more examples, you discover what CIA, you know, little assholes the YouTube people actually are. Because in this list of fair enough sort of, you know, hate speech examples, there's one that sticks out, which is all of the so-called victims of this violent event are actors. No one was hurt, and this is just a false flag. So as soon as you say that those people are actors and not actually victims, and it was a false flag, it will qualify as hate speech on par to saying that you're glad something violent happened to, say, Black people or disabled people or, you know, I don't know what, particle physicists. And it's like, hang on a second, what's wrong with this picture? Here, you really are glad about misfortune befalling human beings, right? I mean, here, for example, look at this example. Person with this attributes noted above are dogs, or person with attributes noted above are like animals. Yeah, well, this is disgusting. But then contrast this with all of the so-called victims of this violent event are actors. Well, if there are actors, they are fraudulent criminals. And in saying that no one was hurt and this was just a false flag is hate speech. Do you see? So what this is in the YouTube terms, there is a clause that covers up organized crime. And if you point out that organized crime, that those people were just actors, and this was a false flag event, meaning it is state organized crime, most of the time high treason as well, then it's hate speech. Well, this particular clause in the YouTube term is actually sanctioning organized crime. It is protecting organized crime. And what you need to know to understand how it came about that YouTube is sanctioning organized crime is to know that they were bought by Google, which was set up by the CIA. And the CIA is the Crown Corporation in America. And the Crown Corporation is actually the one global organized crime cartel I was talking about earlier. Okay, so this is when you can actually see it in print. You are dealing with an organized crime cartel that is using its corporate outfits to cover up its organized crime. Okay, now you can also see that this is actually done in practice by looking at this warning I received on the 16th of August. Sorry, I'm actually sitting on the floor here. I have to sit down, sorry. So you can see that this was done in practice because Professor Fetzer's video, okay, was taken off YouTube for hate speech, right? By the way, you can find it on Vimeo, so don't fret, you can still find it. Okay, so just search for this title and you will find alternative video platforms where I've uploaded it. But this is big, okay? This is evidence for YouTube supporting organized crime, right? So now when I got the second one for nudity, I was just laughing. When I'm talking about international state crime, state organized crime, and I get a strike for nudity and sexual content, yeah, right. Now, doesn't matter. So by the way, I think, oh, I haven't even appealed here, it looks like, but this strike was removed by YouTube. So you can actually see the video and you can also see what the problems might have been with this video. Number one, it had 21,000 views. Okay, and remember that with very kind of topical or very damaging videos, damaging against the crime cartel, the view numbers are manipulated down typically by a factor 10 at least. So this thing was probably viewed by 210,000 people in Germany alone, okay, because this was a German video. That was their problem, okay? That was their problem. So they had to block it somehow or give me a warning. But I thought, okay, guys, if I get a strike for nudity, for exposing eye implants, I mean, this is a still image where I'm showing Omega Ophthalmics, which is manufacturing the devices that I think are the closest thing I can find to these glowing fluorescent eyeballs, or pupils rather, that I have, right? I mean, if nudity is your problem in this, come on, right? So anyway, that's one bit of news, but this strike has disappeared, so I can now make videos again, which is super important because I wanted to tell you about what happened in the United States. Okay, big deal. Now, my trip to the United States was all thanks to Professor James Fetzer, who invited me to a workshop of investigators that took place in New Orleans. And it was the coolest thing ever. Okay. I've had contact with a lot of people who were investigators in the JFK assassination by the CIA, or the Crown Corporation rather. And there was Professor Fetzer himself talking about the false flags in the United States. And also I made contact with a lawyer, a female lawyer who was fighting judicial corruption in the United States, okay? And I am very pleased to say that one of the things that came out of this workshop is that she agreed to come on and do interviews. And I wanted to start an interview series talking about judicial corruption, what it looks like, you know, what sort of dirty tricks they pull, and then talking about what we can do against that, you know. But she has been heavily targeted. They tried to destroy her career and a lot of things, you know. So it was actually her that I wanted to interview as soon as I returned from the United States. And then what happened is that, number one, my channel got a strike and I was told you can't upload videos for a week. And second of all, she also came down with something that I had as well, which is she lost her voice. So she has some sort of pseudo cold, but the most damaging thing is that she can't speak. And this still lasts to this day. So I wanted to interview her this week, but we have to wait for her to recover her voice. Now, the same thing happened to me when I was interviewed by Free Spirit TV in German. This is in Switzerland. And they did a 3-part interview with me. And 2 parts have now been published. So if you speak German, you can go to the Free Spirit TV website, and you can see the first 2 interviews of me talking about Secret Service criminality. But I have to tell you that at that interview, something happened around that time, and I lost my voice for, I think, 2 weeks. And when I mean I lost my voice, I couldn't even croak around with a hoarse voice. I got no tone out. And most curiously, I didn't have a cold, I didn't have a fever, I didn't have a runny nose, I had nothing. I just had a massive inflammation on my vocal cords. So I suspect it was a bioweapon. And heck knows what they did, you know, heck knows. Maybe I now have my vocal cords are now coated in nanotech. I have no idea. But either way, that was extremely strange. It was 100% like an intel attack. And I strongly suspect it was biowarfare, and I couldn't speak for 2 weeks. It was almost like, oh, you're going to talk about this topic? Well, then we're going to damage your voice, you know? Now, one thing you should watch out for now that you know that these sort of bioweapons exist is please go through history and through your, you know, encyclopedic knowledge of pop culture and find all those stars who had an episode of losing their voice. I think Adele was one of them, if I remember correctly, and she even had to have an operation to restore her vocal cords. Now, if I had to bet, I think that's the cartel putting pressure on those stars. I think it's actually, you know, a cartel assault on these stars. So go through history and find these cases and look at the most extreme cases and start investigating, because I think it was cartel retaliation or cartel blackmail. Okay. And then we need to go to all these fucking weapons labs, which are controlled by the cartel, and find out what the fuck this is, you know, what the fuck the bioweapon is with which they are attacking the vocal cords. Is it nanotech? Is it a virus? Is it whatever, you know? And remember that every single bioweapon used by the cartel, it is known by these weapon research labs because that's where it was developed. So MI6 will know what it is. And if the chief of MI6, Alex Younger, doesn't know what it is, he can use his telephone joker and find out, right? So we know what this is, and we most likely, we as in humanity, we also know what to do about it. There's always some sort of antidote or something, you know, because they don't release anything into the wild without having a method of saving their own ass, should they ever be given that. Okay, so keep that in mind. There is a cure for everything. And one of the most important campaigns and hashtags on Twitter is release the cures. Okay, these are people who know that, for example, a lot of the cancers that we have are actually the result of bioweapons. And I have heard, you know, people who mention the Rockefeller Foundation, that they own a lot of the patents of the various things that cause cancer, and that they also own the cures, right? They have patented the cures in many cases. And I think Dr. Richard Miller was blowing the whistle on that as well, you know, the Rockefeller Foundation. So that's that kind of direction you need to look at. But all the national weapons labs would also have the cures, okay? So this is one of the things that we have to, you know, kind of, have to put on the what's called the thumb screws in court and get them. Okay. So very, very important to know. Now, more news, more news, more news. Oh, yes. Now, another thing about the US trip. So the one of the good things that came out of this is my collaboration with this American lawyer. I think she's great. She really impressed me. The breadth of her experience and her knowledge is vast. And she's totally on the same page with us regarding how to fight these criminals, the need for fighting these criminals and so on. Okay. And the other thing I did on this workshop is also inform all the participants about implants and this sort of stuff. And I have learned a lot, you know. I have, well, talking to other victims and because all these investigators are always victims themselves, right? But it was also very, very interesting to hear about all the work that has been done over decades. And one of the things that was, you know, I'm embarrassed to say it was news to me because I'm not that deep into JFK research, but I was really pleased to hear about the work of Jim Garrison, who was I think the state attorney, who said that these things need to be, so that the JFK assassination needs to be investigated. And he was like defamed and assaulted like you wouldn't believe. And I was very pleased that I actually met one of his sons, and he told me how it actually panned out back in the day and how it still continues. But Jim Garrison is one of those very, very important people who was first. We are basically walking in or swimming in the wake of these people. He was one of the first people to really say, look, the CIA needs to be investigated and this entire cabal needs to be shut down. So, you know, it's quite funny. One of the workshop attendees had a book. Actually, I think it was this lawyer. She had a book that she brought along, and it was about the Texas, you know, billionaires, oil billionaires, and one guy in particular called Hunt, and the Hunt, you know, oil wealth in Texas. And, you know, when she wasn't around, I saw the book on the coffee table, and I just opened it randomly, and the page it opened on, it was exactly about the work of Jim Garrison. And I just thought, oh my gosh, you know, here it is. The book was not about the JFK assassination, yet this attorney was so big. He keeps being mentioned in all these books, right? So he has done work that is quoted everywhere around the world. So I'm saying that so that you can start digging. The JFK assassination is relevant because what it was the Crown, in my view, my summary of this is that it was the Crown Corporation, you know, Vatican-owned Crown Corporation operating through the British Crown, the British branch of the Crown, which owns the CIA. It was their hit job on an American president. Okay, that's what it was. But if you want to find out how the Crown Corporation operates, you need to study the JFK assassination. And if you want to find out how to stop them, right, on who the people are who are in the Crown Corporation, you need to go back to that, you know, very big assassination. So that's the connection. That's how we all tied in together. But anyway, Jim Garrison was news to me, a new person I didn't know about. I'm very ashamed to say. I didn't get around to researching JFK very much. Otherwise, I would have come across his work. Now, the other person I met was Gary King, who has done a lot of work exposing all this, and he was amazing, I have to say. What was very funny is that it was Gary King who drove me from the airport to the meeting place and back to the airport. And we were a group of people going back to the airport and traveling home on the day. And then he said, it was early in the morning, and he said, okay, we will be in the rush hour, but I would like to draw your attention to the radio. And he said, every single day, every single working day, and sometimes on weekends, there's always a news report about a mass shooting. But the news report will be filled with signaling, cartel signaling. So he said there always, the number 3 will appear, the number 7 will appear, or 33 will appear, like the age of the shooter was 33 and stuff like that. And there were these, what was it? Oh yes, the names. Their names always end in either RAM, right? Or there will be a word that will be repeated a dozen times, like a rampage and stuff like that. or typically the shooter's name or somebody, you know, who features prominently in the story, their name will end in man and son, like S-O-N, like Erickson and stuff like that. And he said, watch out for this. So names ending in, or names or words containing ram, son, and man. Okay, now, what's the meaning behind this? Okay, now the number 3 is used both by Intel and by the Masons, because the Masons pretty much control Intel and vice versa. They're the same thing, okay? But 3, the 33 levels of Masonry, stuff like, you know, stuff like that. And 3 is used, for example, in a lot of the hits. For example, the assassination attempt on me was exactly 3 days after my court hearing and so on. I think that's again tied to the 33 of the Masons. Now 7 is used by Intel a lot. Okay, so when false flags or Intel hits, the number 7 appears. So I associate the number 33 and 3 and variations thereof with the Masons, 7 with Intel, and for example, in Intel brainwash training, they talk about, you know, the tree of life and 7 sevens. And you know, one MI6 whistleblower once tried to explain it to me, and I was like, oh my God, you know, okay, you have to repeat it 5 times before I get it, but it's something to do with that. So they have these 7 sevens and God, right, all this brainwash scripts around that. So 7s for me are Intel, 3, roughly speaking, are Masons, and of course 666 and 6s are Satanists and Satanism and Lucifer and shit like that. Now the ram and all these horned animals like goats fall into the category of, you know, Satanism again. The 7 I explained is Intel, 3 is the Masons. Now, man, things ending in man, I think refer to their control of humanity. Sometimes they use also in the symbol version of cartel signaling, the cube. So you will see a lot of music videos with cubes, you know, in the background, big cubes all the time. And I think that it's like boxing in humanity, you know, that's the little box of humanity and they are the pyramid and blah, blah, blah. So much about man. Now, the ending son in Erickson, sometimes when you pronounce son, just S-O-N, it sounds like sun, S-U-N. And that goes back to sun worship, right? The sun, which is in the Jesuit logo. So something like that, but keep that in mind. And it was funny because the day before, he showed me a YouTube video where one investigator explained, one researcher, how all these false flags have always the names ending in ram, man, and son, S-O-N, and variations thereof. And then we are driving to the airport and he said, look, this is rush hour. Everybody will have their radio on. Let's listen to the news broadcast. And he said, I promise you, there will be a mass shooting. Listen for these names. Listen for the numbers 3 and 7. And sure enough, there was a mass shooting where there were 3 people dead and 7 people injured. Believe it or not. And there was something about either witness or you know, police investigator or relative, again ending in son, you know, something son. I was like, okay, yeah, there we go, right? So what that means is that, first of all, the mass shooting was fake, right? And was again another bit of brainwash. But also, what is quite telling is that the news were fake. And the news are fake every single freaking day. So imagine there are these little Intel gerbils and they are the Masons and they have to put on some sort of shit show every day of the week so that the news can report about it. Isn't that exhausting? Isn't that a total waste of funds? So, you know, that was just amazing. But what happened is that we were laughing about this news report and then well, what happened is that something smashed the windscreen and there was this huge, you know, dent or bits of glass missing in the windscreen. But one of the things that I remember thinking, so you just heard smash and that's it. And I thought, but every single time a stone or pebble hit the windshield, I always heard at least 2 impacts. you know, the pebble hits, it loses angular momentum, and then it kind of ends up on the car, and then it bounces once or twice until it flips off the car. So there was no second impact. And I thought either this stone came with so much energy that it just bounced off, right, straight off the car, which means that somehow this, you know, thing had some momentum towards the car. So if it's just flipped up, you know, and you just from the road and you just hit it, you just have the normal effect of the stone bouncing a few times. If it's falling off a car in front of you, it has even less momentum towards you because the two cars are traveling at the same speed, right? So the only way I could explain this, what I've just witnessed of this massive, you know, break in the glass, was that a stone was fired from a car in front of us. And the timing was perfect because Gary had just exposed a fake news report, and then his windshield was smashed up. It was like direct retaliation. If you want to retaliate time, you better fire that, you know, projectile from a car. Would anybody see it being fired? Heck no, because it would happen so fast and nobody would be looking, right? So also the kind of the dent of it showed that it came from an angle. So it wasn't the car in front, it was a car that probably overtook us. So, you know, they listen to us or listen to Gary expose this, they overtake and fire this on the windshield. This is really what it looked like. Then my second thought was, well, keep in mind that it could have been a stone or pebble fired from a car, or also it could have been just a directed energy weapon smashing up the glass. And then I remembered how they smashed up this glass, piece of glass on my lamp in the middle of the night when the lamp was off and had been off for hours. So it wasn't a cooling fracture or something like that. And I thought, hang on, okay, so they either fired a pebble or maybe much more reliably, they just hit the windshield with a U, you know? So keep that in mind. So I would say if your windshield gets smashed, watch out for this. Can you hear several impacts of the pebble? You know, and second of all, photograph precisely that damage on your windshield, because it might actually have been a U. And I suspect if it's a U, there will be ways to tell, you know. So anyway, that was the story to the United States. And so I met all these amazing people, and it was just a breath of fresh air, right? But we also suffered from a lot of retaliation. And the upshot of this is that I now have this new interview series coming up with the lawyer as soon as she regains her voice. Okay, so that was very, very, very good stuff. Now, what I want to do is I want to switch to a fast, you know, newsreel here. You're probably wondering, what about my court case? My court case is happening on the 12th. It is still happening on the 12th. I still don't know the exact time, but the court typically starts hearing cases at 10, not at 9. It starts at 10, and they typically finish at 4 p.m. So most likely my court case will happen on the 12th of December between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. at some point during those 6 hours. I have no idea when. So that's all I can say about that. And in the meantime, as you know, I'm being tortured and I'm trying to do my best to prepare this. Now, news. Let's switch to news, because there are a couple of amazing news. Now, oh, yes, I would like, because it's just after the week after Thanksgiving, first of all, I would like to wish all the people in the United States a happy Thanksgiving, okay, in retrospect. And one of the things that I would like to point out about Thanksgiving, hang on, I'm still fishing around for the button to share my screen. Here, it is on the YouTube channel of Dr. Dave Janda, and he is a retired